They're in the final furlong. Mr. Big News is running a very big race of Mr. Big News.
TIZ the Law. Manny Franco shuts down TIZ the Law.
And they're into the stretch. These two stride for stride as they come to the final furlong. They're in the final furlong, and it's Authentic. Authentic is dragging in. TIZ the Law all up to get by him. Authentic has won the Kentucky Derby.
Courtland Simmons with you here at the CS Racing Report, and this is the Kentucky Derby recap. Let's quickly swing into the action from Churchill Downs as Authentic pulls the huge upset, defeating the heavily favored TIZ the Law by 1 1/4 lengths. TIZ the Law was 2 lengths in front of the long shot Mr. Big News, who was 1 3/4 in front of Honor AP, as Authentic, when after briefly being outrun by the 17, TIZ the Law led in fractions or set fractions of 22.92 for the quarter, 46.41 for the half, and then 110.23 for the 3/4. That half mile, 46.41, represents a slightly faster half than War Emblem got in 2002 and comparable to Hardspun in his strong run when finishing second to Street Sense in the 2007 running, a race in which Courtland finished third. All three of those horses, multiple Grade 1 winners and champions in their own right. And we didn't get a mile split on this race, but at that point at 110.23 at the 3/4, this is when TIZ the Law, who was sharp coming out of the gate, outrunning Authentic in the early going, settled in fourth on the outside, then moved into the 3 path, sort of inner switch between those paths, got into contention on that turn, made his menacing stalk and pounce move on Authentic. This was the point of the race in which a lot of people thought TIZ the Law would explode and go by Authentic. And even when that didn't happen, a lot of people thought that at some point Authentic was going to get tired and that he was going to basically, TIZ the Law was going to draw clear and win comfortably. Even if he wasn't at 100% best, he was going to beat this field. That did not happen. And TIZ the Law basically was 3 wide, was driven in the stretch by Manny Franco, got outrun, was clearly second best. That was my description of the favorite who finished second in here. Mr. Big News for Brett Calhoun ran a beautiful race. He was the one closer in this race that had impact in this Kentucky Derby. I said in the preview pod that who out of the closers is going to show some reasonable, legitimate pace pressing or somewhat forwardly placed tactics? Who was going to be the country house of 2020? And when those numbers, before looking at them, were studied, everybody, knew that there were some question marks on a lot of these horses, a lot of them going backwards, a lot of them not in a position to go 1 1/4. Mr. Big News represents something I touched on, that horses with lower numbers might be apt to more appreciate the 1 1/4, and they're going to move up the ladder. And horses that had somewhat good numbers that aren't going to appreciate the distance for whatever reason are going to go down the ledger. And that's what happened in this race. Major Fed did try to show a little bit of forward progress and some ambition in the early going. It backfired on him, and it just didn't work out as he finished where he did, as you see the order of finish in this Derby. And as for the front runners, the merry-go-round effect was something that I talked about. A lot like going back to 02, that 1, 2, 3, where like War Emblem, Proud Citizen, and Perfect Drip were 1, 2, 3 all the way around that racetrack. And that happened somewhat partially in this race, with the exception being New York Traffic. Storm the Court, I thought, in pressing the pace would, it would cost him in the end, and that would be his undoing, and that's what happened. And as opposed to being a mid-pack, being in a mid-pack type position. As for New York Traffic, when describing him, I had said coming in that question mark, he's overachieved going this far with that sprinter's pedigree and outrunning it for trainer Safi Joseph, that the game might be up at 1 1/4. And that's what happened in here. He stalked as he normally does, got outrun somewhat in the early going, was still in a good position, then got buried by TIZ the Law 3.5 furlongs out. He blew right by New York Traffic like he was standing still, and he came up empty in the stretch and finished in 8th at 13 3/4 lengths back. So again, I think that, as I've always said about a lot of horses, this is not a complete death sentence on his ability to go 10 furlongs, and that may even be true before the year is out if they try to entertain thoughts of going in the Classic. But if he stays in training as a 4-year-old, he could possibly pop up and be a blue-collar candidate to do well in a race like the Suburban or ship out west for the Hollywood Gold Cup or the Pacific Classic, races of the like. We'll just have to wait and see what Saffie Joseph will do in the immediate future with New York traffic. One of the interesting developments was Honor AP. I had said that he would show, much like in his debut, some early speed, and in the shared belief, his prep leading into this race where he lost 1,000 words, and he had no speed in the early going. Whether he was distracted, whether he wasn't focused, he was 14th going around the clubhouse turn and partially on the backside before he started to get into motion and get into gear. And he got every bit of that 1.25 miles, but he had too much real estate to make up in order to have an impact on the top three. I think that it could have been, and we'll see what Mike Smith and John Sheriff say in terms of what was going on in the early going. But I can tell you this, Mike Smith, I didn't think he gave him a great ride. It could be argued that he had no option being behind a wall of horses, but coming from where he came from, I think he could have done a little better than being 6, 7, 8 wide going into the turn. He was able to get away with this numerous times with Zenyatta, but that was because Zenyatta was Zenyatta. But how many times in a grade 1 race, and particularly with 3-year-olds, in a race like the Kentucky Derby where position is everything, can you go that wide and expect to hit the board, much less win it? So I didn't think it was a particularly good ride. If the excuse is he just didn't want to run in the early going, then maybe Smith could be excused. But again, it was still a good run from Honor AP. It'll be very interesting to see. I don't think the Preakness is really at the top of his target list. I think the Breeders' Cup Classic, that 1.25 miles, should suit him, although Keeneland's stretch is a little short. So we'll just have to wait and see. Meantime, for Bob Baffert, 6th win in this race, ties Ben A. Jones of the Calumet Dynasty fame with his brother Jimmy with Classic wins or Derby wins. And what a poetic justice situation for him, because even though no one should really whip out the handkerchiefs in droves for him, given his success in the Triple Crown races, he's had a rough year even on his level with Nadal and Charlatan, Nadal being retired, Charlatan being injured, and Arrogate, one of his better horses, passing away, and things of that nature. And then 1,000 words flipping in the paddock. He was one of my upset specials. If you go back to the preview pod and you look at my picks, he flipped. He had to be scratched. And so Authentic was the only one carrying the torch, and he carried it very, very well to win this Kentucky Derby. What a tremendous win for all the connections with everyone whose hands are in the ownership group for the Kentucky Derby winner. In the meantime, beyond Baffert, when looking at the picks, I did say, and I'm not sitting here gloating and bragging, that I picked Authentic unequivocally to win. I did think that in the upset specials that he and or 1,000 words could win this race if there was to be an upset in this Kentucky Derby, and had him finishing in a few scenarios at least 4th if you wanted to use certain horses. That got impacted, though, in terms of what wagering options you had when King Guillermo was scratched, and then obviously at the last minute when 1,000 words had his paddock accident, and that really, really juggled a few people's handicapping options, at the last minute if you were going to use 1,000 words in this race. Meantime, when you look at, again, the final outcome of this race, I think TIZ THE LAW ran a good race. Unfortunately, no Triple Crown on the line. That goes by the boards. He probably comes back in the Breeders' Cup Classic. That's my guess on him. Authentic is maybe a decent candidate to come back for the Preakness. We'll just have to wait and see how that field shapes up as King Guillermo, who scratched, is looking at it, as well as Art Collector. So it'll be very interesting to see, because keep in mind, Bob Baffert, all 5 of his Derby winners won the Preakness. Now, this Triple Crown is different because the Belmont was run first. So the priority to run in the Preakness to have a Triple Crown bid is already by the boards for Baffert. But still, he could keep that record intact by running Authentic in the second jewel. This was a really, really good performance. Again, the closers had no impact. Attachment Rate was a horse that I liked in here. He had absolutely nothing to offer in this race. And some of the others, as you relook at the order of finish, just really didn't impact the race. And I think that a lot of people thought, myself included, thought it would end up that way, and that somebody needed to jump up from the closing contingent, the cluster and cavalry of closers, to make an impact. And Mr. Big News was able to do that. Be curious to see what Brett Calhoun's going to do with him. But in the meantime, Bob Baffert's Authentic wins the 2020 Kentucky Derby by a length and a quarter in 2 minutes, .61 over heavily favored TIZ the Law, who was 2 lengths in front of Mr. Big News, who was a length and 3/4 in front of Honor AP. Authentic, trained by the white-haired wizard Bob Baffert, wins the 2020 Kentucky Derby.
And they're into the stretch, and it's TIZ the Law on the outside of Authentic. These two stride for stride as they come to the final furlong. Authentic is dragging in. TIZ the Law all up to get by him. Authentic and John Velasquez have the lead as they come down to the 16th ball. TIZ the Law still trying to get him. Authentic, TIZ the Law, here's the wire. Authentic has won the Kentucky Derby. John Velasquez does it with Authentic. TIZ the Law has to settle for second. And then with Mr. Big News, Honor AP ends up fourth. 2 minutes, .61 seconds was the final time for Authentic. Bob Baffert has done it for the 6th time.
And he ties the all-time record for trainer for most Kentucky Derby wins. And Bob Baffert, for the 3rd time in 6 years, trains the Kentucky Derby winner, American Pharoah in 2015, Justify in 18, and now Authentic.